Welcome back to our Neo X Series training. In the previous video, we spoke all about controlling the intensity of our fixtures and how we can start to select and choose which fixtures we want to control. In this video, we're going to be talking all about color and position and starting to really gain access to all of the various attributes that your fixture may have. So I'm just going to go and bring this playback down so we can start from a blank stage. Now we've spoken about where we can use syntax, and we can also go ahead and actually go and grab control of fixtures directly from the channel grid. Another way that we can actually control our rig is through magic sheets as well. So if I go and just minimize our channel grid there, and I'm going to go and open my magic sheet. This is a magic sheet I've already created, and so actually I might want to go and interact with here, and I can go and actually select a bunch of lights on the truss and turn those on, or I might actually want to go and tap on an on-screen group button and go and actually turn those fixtures on as well, for example. So there's various ways that you can gain control of your fixtures, whether it be through your various magic sheets you might have, your channel grid, or your syntax. But once you've got them in control, we can then go ahead and start to access the various attributes. Now on your console, your top row of buttons here, these are your attribute families. So you've got intensity, position, color, beam, and edge. Those are your various attribute families. So keeping things simple, if I go and tap intensity, this is where you can just purely control the intensity and also the various strobe controls that your fixture may have. We spoke previously about how we can use our intensity wheel for this, but we've also got the intensity of these fixtures, in this case, on encoder wheel number 1 as well. And so I can see that if you tap intensity, I can see that I've got dimmer on that encoder wheel. Now our next attribute family along is position, so that's our pan and tilt. So I might want to go and tilt these fixtures onto stage, and then I can pan them left and right. What I can also do though is actually fan those fixtures if I want to. So if I want to fan them onto my drummer there, upstage center, I can go ahead and click my fan key, and then I can actually go and adjust the pan spread on that if I want to. And when I'm happy, I can go and hit enter to save that. And then my encoder wheels go back to your kind of normal pan and tilt control without fan function. So we've got our position encoders there. Also within position, we've actually got zoom and edge. So we provide those controls on the encoder wheels whilst controlling pan and tilt, because they're very useful functions to be able to access whilst you're moving your lights and getting them into the position you need them in. Our next attribute family along is color in this case. So these particular fixtures have got CMY mixing, and you can see on my encoder buttons here, these are color coded, so I know exactly which encoder does what. And as well as that, we do also have the buttons themselves. When we're controlling our fixtures here, this allows us to boost up or down the current level. But if I go and tap color again, that pages us through to the next page of color control. So just simply tap color again. Now in this case, I've got a color wheel on these particular fixtures. These are VL2600 spots. So what I'm going to go and do is I'm just going to go and pop them back to white. So I'm just going to dial my encoder wheels to set CMY to 0. And rather than using the color mixing, I might want to page through my color and use my color wheel. So I can go and use my wheel to scroll through. But when we're using a parameter with frames, so discrete values within the range that parameter has, we can actually use the buttons. And our buttons there will go up and down through the various functions of that particular attribute. So in the case of our color wheel here, we can use up and down to actually step through our individual colors in the wheel. Now, if you find that you're controlling a parameter, but you want more fine control, so I've got control of magenta there, just go ahead and hold Neo and dial your encoder, and that will then give you fine control for that particular attribute. The next attribute along, I'm just going to go and tap my home key, the home key on the console. That's going to send all of the attributes back to their default. So I'm just going to go and tap home to set those back. And I might want to just go back to position and bring those on stage a little bit more like similar to how we had them earlier. The next attribute family along is beam. So beam is anything that might be affecting the actual beam of light. So this is where we've got our gobo control. So gobo wheel 1. Again, my first encoder, I can now step through those gobos by using the up and down arrows to step through those. And if I tap beam again, that's going to page me, and I can then actually access gobo wheel 2 on these particular fixtures as well. Tap beam, keep tapping beam, and that will then cycle you back to the first page of beam attributes. And then our last attribute family is edge. So anything that might affect the edge of the beam of light. So we would include iris in there, and we've got zoom and we've got edge. Zoom and edge, as we mentioned, we did have access to those within position as well, because they're handy tools to have available to you. So we've got all of our encoder controls there that we've spoken about. We've got the encoders themselves, we've got the buttons. As well as that, though, we can actually go and tap on a attribute on the touchscreen, tap on its button, and that will give us access to that particular attribute's functions. So for example, I could go and set that particular attribute, in this case here it's tilt. I can go and set tilt home straight from there. And you can actually access palettes from that window as well, so you can send a particular attribute to a palette. Now, in some cases, you might know an exact value you want to set tilt to. So if you have that scenario there, you can go and tap on, if I just come out of that window, you can go and tap on your encoder button, and that will bring tilt at onto the command line. So if I go and say tilt at 50, enter, that's going to set tilt to 50 degrees for me. And again, I can do the same with pan, tap the button in the middle. I could go and say pan at 20, enter, to set my pan and tilt in degrees through the command line. And it's a very similar thing as well with colour. So we go and pop those back on stage again. I'm going to go back to colour, and I might want to have cyan at 100. So I can put cyan in using syntax if I wish to as well. So we've spoken about our encoder wheels and how we can use those to gain control of our individual attributes. But let's also talk about the sidebar. So the sidebar, this lives by default top right of your main display. And this gives you access to all of the various attributes your fixture may have. So we're in the intensity tab here, and we can see that we can go and control the intensity of those. I can go to the position tab if I want to, and that will actually give me access to the pan and tilt grid. So within here, I can actually go and interact with my fixtures within here. So this is useful for if you want to get your fixtures to a rough location and then fine tune that position with the encode wheels, for example. It's worth noting that as you do change page on the encoders, as you tap colour to access the colour encoders, your sidebar will live update, it will follow what you're doing. So in this case here, I can actually use on-screen faders to adjust the levels of CMY. And in here, I've actually got buttons as well, so I can set CMY to full if I want to, or set certain attributes all the way off. Now, in the case of our colour wheel, we mentioned that on the encoder wheels, we could step through colours with our buttons. In here, we've got a drop down. So we can access the slots of our fixtures with colour wheels with a drop down window there if you wish to. Next tab along, let's go to beam. Beam, that's going to give us access to our gobos. So again, we can have access to each individual gobo wheel from here. Now, if you're regularly controlling the slots of colour wheels and also gobos, you might find that you want to use the frame picker. So on my second screen here, I'm going to go and open the frame picker. And within here, it's going to show me the available frames for the currently selected fixtures. So I can go and tap on a gobo image, pop that into my fixtures if I want to, and I can go and use one of the colour slots within that particular colour wheel. Now, the nice thing about this window is there is an option at the bottom for clear other gobo wheels. So the nice thing about that is you don't need to worry about overlaying gobos, because if you put a gobo in from one wheel and then go to put a gobo in from another wheel, it will automatically take the other one out. The console will just, when you're using this window, help you out, and with that option on, it means that you can only ever have one gobo in at a time. I'm going to go and tap home just to clear out all of those various values, send those fixtures back to default. And the last kind of family we haven't spoken about is edge. So that's where anything that affects the edge of the beam lives. You would also get framing shutters in there as well if you've got fixtures with framing shutters. And so those live within the sidebar. So let's go and take a look at colour now. Let's spend some time just looking at colour control. So I'm going to go and close this tab here on the touchscreen. And that will now give me a full screen colour window. So within the colour window, we're able to access various tabs. So let's go to very top. We've got our show colours. So these are various colours that you might have used in the show and kind of primary and secondary colours as well. We've then got our palette view. So this allows you to kind of go and choose various colours. You can't go and kind of click and drag. It's a very much choose the colour you need style of operation for this one. We've then got our HSI mixing. Now you'll notice that when you go into the HSI colour mixing window, you can of course go and touch on the touchscreen there to change colour, but it's actually changed your encoder wheels as well. So the encoder wheels will actually now allow you to adjust hue, saturation and intensity. And you can see as I do that, the various levels are changing on my screen, so I can mix in that colour space. Similar thing, I can actually go and mix in RGB. Remember, these fixtures are CMY, but I can actually, if I'd rather, in this mode, go and interact with the fixtures in RGB mode instead. CMY, so in the case of this is the native colour space of these fixtures, so that's all fairly straightforward. And the next tab within the colour window is our filter library. So Neo has a hugely extensive filter library. You can access all the various gels and filters from in here. And if you need to, you can go ahead and use the drop down at the top and go and filter by a certain gel manufacturer if you need to, just to access the gels from there. And there is search as well. So if I want to, I can go and pop in there and then pull out my keyboard drawer to search for that. Next tab along at the bottom is the spectrum. So you can go in here, you've got less saturated colours at the top, you've got fully saturated in the middle, and then you can actually bring down the intensity of the colour by moving to the bottom of that window. The very last tab at the bottom of your colour window is a CIE chart. So you can actually go in and interact within the CIE colour mixing space if you would prefer, and you actually get your X and Y coordinates displayed top right of that window as well. So if we pop back to the filter library, of course with filters, we've spoken about how you can find something in the list, you can search for it, but there might be certain filter numbers you're regularly using. And if there are, you can actually type in on the command line the exact filter numbers you need. So what I'm going to go and do is I'm going to double tap clear just so we can go from a blank stage and we can start to create something from scratch. So I'm going to go and say that I want 31 through full, that's turning on fixture 31 through to a change in fixture type, and it's putting those onto full. What I can then say is at colour. So I can use the syntax at colour. And now I can specify a filter number if I want to. Now the syntax is filter manufacturer point filter number. And the filter manufacturers are actually numbered in alphabetical order. So what I mean by that is if I wanted an Apollo filter, I could go and put at colour 1 point and then type in the Apollo filter. So in my console here, I can go back and filter to Apollo and I can just see some numbers there. So I could go and say at 1.3700 and that's going to pop that particular Apollo filter in for me. If I want to do the same with Lee, well, Lee, that's going to be the third gel manufacturer. So I'm going to say 31 through full at colour 3.120, for example. And that's going to put in Lee 120 into my fixtures for me. You can also do filter ranges. So there, what we've done is we've said all of those fixtures go to one particular gel colour, but we can also do filter ranges. So in this case, again, I'll start from a fresh console. I'm going to go and say 31 through 37, full. And I'm then going to go and say that I want these to be at 3.120 through 3.768, enter. And we're then getting a filter range because we're saying that we want our fixtures from Li 120, which is a deep blue, through to Li 768. And so we can see that filter range taking effect. And the order that that is happening in is the order of selection. If I'd have said 37 through 31, that would have reversed the selection. Now in this example here, I can then actually take that one step further and put a peak within that particular fan. So what I can do this time is actually say at color 3.120 through 3.768 through 3.120, enter. And we're then going from our deep blue to our midpoint of L768 and then through to deep blue again. So we can get a color fan across our fixtures. So that is using our filter libraries and how we can actually use some of that on command line. And this is a really good example of something you're probably going to want to save. When you get fixtures in positions, colors, beams, edges, when you get them into values that you want, it is a very good idea to record those values as palettes. So let's take a look at palettes now. A palette is really just a shortcut. It's a way of me getting back to this color information on these particular fixtures. So what I'm going to go and do in this example here is I'm going to access my, my palettes. And in this example, I am actually going to go and open it on my monitor here. So I'm going to minimize my color window and I've got my palettes drop down. Now, first option is tabbed palettes. And what that means is I can access all of my palettes all in one window. But if I'd rather, I could just open just color palettes or just position palettes. Every single attribute, so intensity, position, color, beam, and edge, they all have palettes available to you. And in fact, you've got some extra other ones as well. You've got presets and you've got utilities. So I'm going to go and open the tabbed palette view because that's going to allow me to access all of my various different palettes in one place. You'll now see that I've got the different attribute families running along the top of my screen. You can see here I've got an empty color window. I've not got any color palettes recorded yet. So I'm going to go and say record on my console. Now I could go and tap straight into the window. So I'm going to go and say record to there, and that then allows me to give that a name. I'm not going to give it a name. I'm just going to go ahead and say enter, and it's just going to be recorded without a name, and it's recorded that color palette. Equally though, I could have used the syntax record color to enter. And that will have recorded that as color palette too. So I can now go from those fixtures being homed straight back to that custom color. And I can use those pre-recorded palettes. Again, I can recall that rather than using a window, I can use syntax. So if these fixtures are homed, I could go and say at color to enter. And I'm saying at color 2, so that's at color palette 2 that we've already programmed. So we can open our palette window here as a dedicated window. As well as that though, if you just want to really kind of have a quick checkup of what you've got, or you just want to very quickly grab a palette, on your first screen, you have your palettes drop-down menu there. So you can access all of your palettes just from a very quick drop-down. So I can go to palettes, go to color, tap the color I need, and it gets applied to my fixtures. And then I can just tap off of that to close if I need to. So I've got my color palettes here that I programmed. If I need to, I can update them. Let's say that I don't want to have that color in the middle. I just want to go from blue through to L768. So I'm going to tweak this. So I'm going to go and say that I want at color 3.120 through 3.768. Enter, and that gets it back to that single spread from one filter to another. And I'm now going to use the syntax update color to enter. And that's now updated my palette. So palette 1, that's still how it was, but palette 2 has now got my updates. If I wanted to, I could have just hit update and then hit the physical palette if I wanted to. And that will have also updated that palette for me. If I need to get rid of a palette for whatever reason, go ahead, tap the delete button on your console, and you can then go ahead and tap the palette you want to get rid of, and I can then go and confirm that, and I'm going to go and say OK to get rid of that. If you wanted to, you could have said delete color to enter, for example, and done it from a syntax-based method. So we've spoken about color palettes there, but that logic, it applies for all of the different palette types. So for example, if I go to my position tab here, I've got some pre-programmed palettes that I've made for positions. They're just shortcuts to positions. For example, I've got some here that are grayed out. So you can see I've got some that are highlighted, some that are grayed out. If you see that there's some that are grayed out, that would indicate that those have been recorded with other fixtures in your console. So I'm just going to go and release these fixtures, and I'm going to go and say 61 through 69 full. And these fixtures, I used these earlier, and I've already programmed a palette for these, so I can very quickly get them back to that location that I'd had them in previously. Now, these are kind of your normal palettes and normal palette behavior, but something else that Neo X has are tracking palettes. And I'll just quickly mention, a tracking palette can actually receive a DMX input. And so rather, these palettes here, they've got static values. They have static pan and tilt values, or they've got static CMY values in the case of color palette. But for our position palettes, you might decide, well, actually, the pan and tilt values, I don't want them to be static values in that palette. I want them to receive a live updating DMX input, and then the values come from that. And so that's what we would refer to as a tracking palette. You can send a DMX input that might be changing up and down, map those particular channels to pan and tilt, and you can then record that palette into your cues. And that means whenever you use that palette, the console will just use the incoming DMX input to affect the values of that particular fixture's parameters. So I've been using this screen quite a bit here, but you don't have to use that screen. You can actually access your groups to select your lights. You can access your palettes from here as well. And you can also access your colors and the frame library, all from the internal touchscreen there, just so you can really access that nice and quickly next to your command line. So that is our controlling fixtures training video. We've got all sorts of more in-depth videos on controlling fixtures, a dedicated video on palettes, a dedicated video on color control. So if you do want to know more, do check those videos out. They're available on the console and on our YouTube channel. And if you've got any questions, of course, do reach out to the Vari-Lite support team.